Wasn't never one of my life goals or ambitions to be a world traveler, much less explore deepest, darkest Africa. I was in ministry. I had founded a youth mentorship organization, and one of my board members was a well-known evangelist, pastor, and he was invited to keynote a ministry leadership conference, 20th annual conference in Nigeria, and asked if I wanted to go along. Because Africa has a lot of youth, and he thought with my connection with youth ministry, I'd want to, experience that. And talked to him about it. I said, sure, I'll go. I was just going to carry his bags, basically. I mean, this guy was keynoting this 20th annual big international conference. I met the organizer, and he agreed that I could go along, and got all our travel arrangements made. And it's pretty involved getting visas and such to go over there. At the last minute, my friend, he had been working on producing a feature film, and he got funded. Somebody wrote him a $4 million check, and he had to stay and produce his film and had to back out. And the organizer of the event over there said, well, we've already got everybody showing up. What are we going to do? And he said, oh, Mike can fill in for me. And I was not a public speaker at all, still not much of one. But the organizer, we had lunch, and he agreed that, that was, I guess their only option was for this new guy to come and lead this ministry conference. And it went well. I was there for a month, traveled all over the country, met quite a few folks, had to speak a couple hours a day, every day for weeks at a time. They have very long attention spans there. And I was the first person invited back in their 20 years to keynote it again the next year. So I guess it worked. And that was the start of my, I guess you'd call it love affair. My many return trips to Nigeria. I've done a lot of work over there, and I feel we're just getting started in many ways. The first time I was there, I had no idea what to expect. I had to look up where Nigeria even was on the map. I didn't know anything about it. All I knew was, but most people think, the internet scammers, Nigerian princes, nothing could have prepared me for my experience there. First of all, English is the official language. They were a British colony, so there's really not a communication barrier there. But I'd have to say my first 2 weeks there, I felt sorry for the people. Everything that we take for granted that they lack. I always said there's the Holy Trinity in a Nigerian hotel room. If you have a toilet seat, hot water, and an air conditioner all at the same time, there's something magic happening. Because usually you have to pick one of those two. They might have hot water and air conditioner, but there's no toilet seat. I mean, it's just and the power goes out all the time. I mean, all the time. Roads are rough. The things that we take for granted, everything, they just don't have, and it seems like such a hard, rough, almost post-apocalyptic life. And as Americans, we respond, "Oh, poor you." About 2 weeks into it, it turned upside down in my head, and I started feeling sorry for us, because all the things they take for granted that we don't have here anymore. I've said it many times, the character that made America great, and that's what made America great, was our character, our faith, our work ethic, our integrity, our ambition, entrepreneurism, our Yankee ingenuity. That's what made America great. It's hard to find that here these days, but it's in abundance over there. It's everywhere you look. The people are incredibly faithful, passionate, hardworking, extremely intelligent, very family-oriented. In the South, where I've spent most of my time, it's almost like the book of Acts in that, you see real faith. You see miracles happen that people here don't believe happen anymore. They just walk in it. You see the little kids, their Bibles are marked up like it's your grandma's. Every page is highlighted dog-eared. They really embrace it, and they live it. It's amazing. And again, I in many ways, I feel more at home there than I do here because of that. I mean, and that sort of stuck with me. I want them to send missionaries to us. I tell them that all the time. We could use y'all here. So I guess I didn't know much about it, but began to fall in love with it. It's an amazing place with amazing potential. So there was a big banner headline on The Economist magazine maybe 10 years ago, Africa Rising. All indicators in the global economy are pointing to Africa emerging as a global leader in coming generations. There's a number of reasons. One is the character that I mentioned, it's evident. You can't hold good people back. So rich in natural resources there. I mean, one of the main things is every industrialized nation on earth is aging. And if you look at the population, age curves, like our baby boom where people are retiring, there's not enough people in the workforce to support all the retired people. And we're sort of the middle of the road. The worst is China with their one-child policy forever. Their CEOs, their generals, their political leaders, the people that make stuff happen, they're reaching retirement age. And all these years and years, they've only been allowed one child each. So there's really not a workforce to support them. They're very top-heavy. China is in a very precarious position. They know it. Russia, all the industrialized nations. The average median age in most of the industrialized world is in the 40s. Japan, I think, is the oldest. The average age is almost 50 years old. Africa, the average age is 18, 19 years old. They have the youth, they have the numbers, they have the resources, they have the character to really emerge as global leaders. Of course, a lot of obstacles in the way too, but that's where all eyes are focused, is on Africa. And the big players are playing hardball over there. I actually am on the board of a construction company, and we were invited to present a proposal to build a high-speed rail line between Lagos and Abuja. That's their capital and their big economic center of Lagos. We got beat because the premier of China himself flew to present their proposal. And he threw around about $3 billion in bribes to get that contract. So I mean, the big players are playing hardball there. Nigeria is the largest, most populated nation by far in Africa. About 1/4 to 1/5 of the entire continent lives in Nigeria. It's the largest economy. They are in the top 5 of OPEC as far as oil production, and they're only scratching the surface. So they are the bellwether. Nigeria, as goes Nigeria, so goes Africa, and I believe that's a play really for the world in the future as they emerge in leadership. Another thing about Nigeria specifically, the most educated group in America? It's Nigerians living in America. It's not Asians, it's Nigerians. You've never met a Nigerian here that wasn't successful at what they do. Amazing people with amazing potential, and I believe they represent the future. And if I come from a Christian perspective, I know there's more than meets the eye in this world. There's kingdoms, there's a kingdom of light and a kingdom of darkness, and they're constantly at war. We don't always see it here, be blunt, because we're behind enemy lines. We're not the front line where this battle's taking place. We've been beat for a while. Not that we can't come back, but the action's taking place there. That's where the struggle, I believe, for the heart of the world, for the future lies, is there in Nigeria. So that's sort of setting the table there, why this is important. So I went back many times, speaking, building relationships, ministering. I've been in orphanages and villages and prisons, even a leper colony. Seen a lot of the nation. 3 years ago, I was there, had organized a mission trip. There was a half dozen of us or so. And we were traveling the country speaking to various churches and various venues. My dear friend, the organizer there, Jed DeGrace, he runs my ministry in Africa. He had put this all together, and the culmination of this was a very large engagement in Abuja. Abuja is the capital city, about 3 million people. And it's a modern city. It was only established in the 70s, and it's a very modern city. They had organized 21 churches to come together to book a large venue and promote it and get all the logistics together. That's a big undertaking, and Jed had put a lot on the line for that. And we were literally dressed up in the vans, getting ready to go to this speaking engagement, this big event. And Jed comes out, and he pulls me aside and said, "Mike, we can't go." What do you mean we can't go? We've been looking forward to this. We came here to Africa for this. What do you mean we can't go? The 21 churches. He said, "Mike, I've been in prayer. There's a threat there. You're at risk. I can't take you. You can't go." And I've known Jed a long time, and I know that he's a godly man. And I don't doubt what he says when he says something like that. So I said, "Okay, Jed, what are we going to do?" And he said, "Let's go visit an IDP camp." I didn't even know what that was. And just a note, there was an outbreak of violence at that venue that afternoon. It was shot up. They got tired of waiting for us. So Jed was right. So I said, "Jed, okay, let's go to an IDP camp." He told me IDP stands for internally displaced persons. It is legally the same status as a refugee, but they're in the same nation. So an IDP is a refugee, people that were forced from their lands. And we got in the van, we're driving down the highway connecting Abuja to its airport. Again, most modern capital city in Africa, brand new airport, highway, probably the best highway in all of Africa. Very nice. And about halfway to the airport, we pull off on a dirt track and start bumping down this really rough, rutted road about a quarter mile. And we come to something that I've never could imagine. The most horrific, decrepit living conditions you ever saw. Now, let me show you a little video clip here. First, real brief one just to establish, Nigeria is a very prosperous place. There's a lot of money there. This is a little flyover, if it'll play, of Abuja, just so you can see where I'm talking about. That's Abuja. Very nice capital city. We walk into this camp and see how horrific it is, but the first thing that hits us, I just got to show you. Oh, hang on, that's not it. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. And this was completely out of the blue. My guy that was with me pulled out his iPhone and started filming it. None of this was planned or prompted. Look at that. About the happiest, most smiley kids you ever saw. Hundreds of them. And they just wanted to say hi. I teach kids to give me five everywhere I go, and it just catches on, and everybody's laughing. And I mean, there's one of our team members. That is what greeted us. Heck of a greeting, too. I mean, just joyful kids, full of life. And these are just bright people. I mean, in fact, when I worked my way through it, got to where I was going to talk to this person, I looked down, there's a little girl, one of these little girls sitting on a log down there. And again, she'd just been waving and high-fiving and smiling, and she sits down to catch her breath, and a fly walks across her face. And that snapshot froze in my head, and at that moment I realized, how do I relate this to people? Because we've seen that image 1,000 times. You know, feed the children for 50 cents a day, and they're dehumanized and desensitized. But this is just a bright little girl. It could be a little girl at your church, it could be your next door neighbor. And she's got joy, she's got hope, and she's got potential, and she's got a future. And she's not this little, two-dimensional caricature of a starving kid. She's just a little girl. And that I know that even right then at that moment it hit me. How do I get past that? Because most Americans are so jaded. These are real people. And after the kids, I sort of worked my way through the camp and started to see, in spite of their smiley faces and stuff, their living conditions. This is a little walkthrough. Again, this was just spontaneous, caught on an iPhone as we got there. It's impossible to imagine living conditions on Earth that are worse than this, that anybody actually lives at. I mean, somebody could maybe be, there's the sewage ditch right through the middle of this. The primary construction material is, sticks and scrap metal, feed bags, stuff they've scrounged. That's how they live. Quarter mile off the nicest road in the nicest city in all of Africa. Got through to this woman right here. That's where I was led to. And again, this was completely spontaneous. Didn't have any idea what to expect. That's Miss Hannatu. I'm going to talk about Miss Hannatu for a bit and tell you her story. 3 years ago, Miss Hannatu had been there 6 years. Miss Hannatu is a single mom with 3 girls. And she told me her story. She lived in the northern part of Nigeria, about 600 miles away, which is a very far distance. Different world, really. With her 3 girls, had a house. She was principal of a school. She's very educated, very bright, speaks perfect English. That's the official language there. A little bit of an accent, but you definitely understand her. Her village was named Gwoza, and she said, when Boko Haram, the terrorist group, first came in to the village, they were only killing the men, so we decided to stay, her and the other women. She had 5 men that were close to her and her girls killed in their presence over the course of several days, and not a sterile lethal injection, but you can't imagine the horror they witnessed. She said when they found out that the women were taking food to the surviving men up in the mountains, they started to kill and rape the women and girls too. So we realized we had to leave. And so some of the women got together with the kids and trekked barefoot, didn't want to make any noise, off trails, through the bush, hiding at night only, hiding from lights, hiding from sounds, and made it to Cameroon, neighboring nation, and had a little camp there. Just catching their breath, Boko Haram chased them down. Miss Hannatu had a nursing mother sitting next to her, shot and killed. And the government of Cameroon came along and said, we don't want this here. They herded them onto cattle trailers and dumped them back across the border into Nigeria. Miss Hannatu, this Christian mother of 3, school principal, educated woman, they finally make it to a camp that's a little more established in Nigeria. They're finally catching their breath. They hear Boko Haram's on the way, we gotta go. They scramble, jump into vehicles, everybody goes different directions. She ends up 600 miles away in Abuja. They're driving, you saw the highway scene there. She said they'd never seen pavement, they'd never seen high-rise buildings with glass in them and all this. And it was like driving the streets of heaven, she said. She said, girls, we're gonna be okay. And they pull down that same dirt track, go bumping down to what I just showed you. And so you have to stay here. And she's broken, It's horrific. No mistake or life choice of hers got her there. She's a victim and dumped into this little patch of land. And she finally recovers enough strength to ask somebody, so which one of these can my girls and I stay in? And they laugh at her and say, you got to build your own. And when we met her 3 years ago, she'd been there 5-6 years. No way out. Disconnected, don't know who in her family's still alive, who's dead, where they are. No way to contact them. No support at all from any entities. They had a water well 5 years prior, but it broke, so now they don't. When I met her, she's standing in front of her shanty grinding corn by hand, has enough to feed her and her daughters, sell a little bit, to buy enough raw corn the next day to do it over again. I come to find out that there's a small little building on the edge of camp, 250 some odd school-age kids. Miss Hannatu had organized 2 other volunteers from camp, and they started running a little school there. They had to do a couple shifts a day to fit all the kids in there. And some days they had to cancel it when somebody was sick, or they had to go and try to scrounge medicine or something for somebody. So I'm talking to Miss Hannatu, and we can't stay long because of the security threat. And she asks me, or I ask her, I say, Miss Hannatu, I made her a promise. I'm going to tell your story, wherever I can. Say, and if people want to respond, what is it you need? How can we help you? They don't have water. They don't have food. They don't have shelter. They don't have medicine or access to it. They don't have any support at all. And Miss Hannatu, I thought she'd have a list. I would. In America, somebody stubs their toe and they want reparations. Give me a free Obama phone. Miss Hannatu, pay off my student loans? No. Miss Hannatu said, please, help us teach these children. She said, with education, they will have strength of character. They will have vision. They'll have hope. And they'll have a way out of camp. That's the only way out of the camp for them that we can see. I won't be able to get them out of camp. Help teach these children. So I agreed to that too. So there was 2 commitments I made to Miss Hannatu. I was going to tell her story, which I'm doing here, and that's why we're doing this documentary, and help teach her kids. We got home from that trip. That was November 3 years ago. Jumped straight into Thanksgiving, and then Christmas, then New Year's, and then COVID. Right? And a little bit of a mess there, and life takes over. And it was a couple months later, Jed called me and said, Mike, school year's about to start. What are we going to do? I said, what do you mean, what are we going to do? And he said, remember the IDPs? I said, okay, what do we need? Ends up, you can get a full-time teacher for just a couple $1,000s a year, certified, trained, they don't need a lot. Ends up, we have put 3 full-time staff there at that camp teaching those 250 some odd kids, plus put those 3 volunteers, including Ms. Hannatu, on a retainer to help them continue to do that. Got materials and all that. I'll show you some pictures. And in doing research, we have found dozens and dozens and dozens of camps like that. The biggest one we have found has over 1,000 children with no access to education. And we're just scratching the surface. The United Nations estimates from a few years ago say there's 2.1 million internally displaced people in Nigeria. And not all of them are living in camps, but a lot of them are. And so just by speaking at the Methodist Church and a couple other churches and little groups like this have been able to raise enough money. We have schools now in 3 camps, and we'd like to do a whole lot more. Let me see if I can find this little video here. Here we go. Let that play while I'm talking. That's Luca. He's a young man who's the principal there at that camp, the New Kuchingoro, where Miss Hannatu lives. Really bright young man. He's a resident there. He's a volunteer. He's a victim there, but he's doing what he can for those kids. So there's some of the supplies we sent. We started my ministry there is called Africa Arise, and the schools are called the Arise Academies. I'm told that, especially at New Kuchingoro, that first camp, by us getting the ball rolling, other organizations have come alongside us there, provided the uniforms. A lot of them provide food. Volunteers come in, but we still provide the full-time staff for these 250 some odd kids. So, it's not a fancy place, but it's getting the job done. There are just some pictures there. I mean, that's what we're talking about. I noticed that little girl earlier sleeping on the table there. It's a rough life. Well, anyway, so that's the one thing. I promised I'd help teach the kids, and we're doing our best with that. If you all feel so inclined to help with that, we could certainly use the help. It doesn't cost a whole lot to fund a teacher over there. The other thing, we're going to tell your story. We planned a trip to go back, get some more video and all that, and it's a mess. The government there has gotten pretty bad. And realized pretty quickly that just doing what we're doing, to do it with all our strength and to do it right, it would mean doing a documentary film. That's how big ideas are communicated these days. So little by little, we started putting together a team and getting the ball rolling on that. So that's what these guys are here helping with that. We have some big ideas and big ambitions, but we, in the midst of that, also dug into a whole lot of research on what's really the roots here, what's going on. And the good Lord's given me a lot of access in that regard. I have a dear friend now who's a retired U.S. ambassador. He was an ambassador to a neighboring African nation, but he was the #1 guy in charge of rebuilding Iraq after the war, and he was the #1 guy in charge of rebuilding Haiti after the earthquake. I mean, top shelf guy. He built the first round of refugee camps and welcomed the refugees fleeing ISIS. He was in Jordan and he did that. So, I mean, this guy's got really keen insight and high-level insight. Through him and other sources have connected with numerous former ambassadors, think tank leaders. I spent a couple hours with the Nigerian Catholic cardinal who had just gotten off the phone with his good friend the Pope. I mean, again, God's given me pretty high-level connections there to get involved, to really find out what's going on, including a friend of mine now is a former level 5 military intel, former White House liaison for military intel. So got some pretty good insight there. So all the years that I had been going before 2015 thereabouts, Nigeria's always been a very stable place in recent history since about 1980, when it really stabilized after the Biafran War. Nigeria is not a natural country. What I mean is, when the British pulled out, they just drew some lines on a map and said, "Here, good luck." And it shouldn't have been drawn that way. It's just like Middle East after World War I, when Lawrence of Arabia, like, don't do it, don't lump these people together, they'll be fighting forever, I think they did it on purpose. I mean, they're still in control. Divide and conquer will, draw the lines that keep them divided, keep them fighting each other so they don't fight us. And I could go deep into that. But it's, it's always been stable. The northern half is Sharia law Muslim, has been for 1,000 years, ever since the Fulani tribe came out of the Sahara and conquered, and they're still the warlords in the north. That's where the global slave trade originated. So all the slaves that were bought and sold during the 1700, all came out of there. It was the Fulani that enslaved them and sold them. And they still are the global slave trade capital of the world. There's still open-air slave markets there. The South, as I mentioned, is like Book of Acts Christian. And in downtown Abuja, side by side, you have the National Cathedral and the National Mosque built at the same height as a sign of, hey, we're making this work, we're getting along. There's a movement called Nigeria Prays. It has Muslims and Christians. They know we're not praying to the same God, but we're going to pray for the same things. So they've made it work. By tradition, the presidency has alternated Christian, Muslim, until 2014, the Arab Spring. You remember that? Nigeria had a Christian president. Goodluck Jonathan was his name. Nothing terribly remarkable about him. He's doing the job, keeping the peace. With American U.S. military support, which they'd always had, keeping Boko Haram at bay. I mean, there were always problems. The first time I was in Abuja, they blew up the UN headquarters around the corner from where I was. But again, they were kept in their little corner until presidential election coming on the horizon, Arab Spring 2014. This warlord from the north emerges as a contending candidate. This guy had been a perennial candidate. He had never amounted to anything. He had been a brutal military warlord, a lot of record of atrocities. He had been on record calling for global Sharia law, General Muhammadu Buhari. But all of a sudden, this this fringe radical candidate from the north is a contender for the presidency. And good luck Jonathan starts to suffer setback after setback. Boko Haram's expanding. You have the Gwoza massacre, where you can look it up on the Wikipedia, the Gwoza massacre. You have the Chibok girls kidnapped. Bring our girls back, 276 girls that were kidnapped. And that's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we didn't hear about over here when they would get a school and chain the doors closed and burn it down with the kids and teachers inside. That happened more than once. All this happened in the lead up to the presidential election. Jonathan ends up so beleaguered by this that he loses the presidency to this Muhammad Buhari, who's promising to keep the peace. Well, I dig into that a little more. Right in the midst of all this, guess who Muhammad Buhari's campaign advisor on record was that engineered his campaign for the presidency? Anybody want to take a guess? David Axelrod. That's a fact. That was Obama's political director, his chief of staff. The reason that President Jonathan started losing to Boko Haram is because we pulled our military support from him at this critical time. Under the auspices, they don't recognize gay marriage. Well, up north, they stone homosexuals to death to this day, but we won't address that, but we can't give you military support. I have it from a firsthand eyewitness that was there in the White House, that we had live drone footage. We knew exactly where those Chibok girls were every step of the way, and we refused to give that intel to the Nigerian military. We sold those girls into sex slavery so that Muhammad Buhari could win the presidency of Nigeria. That is indisputable. While Michelle Obama was holding "Bring Our Girls Back" on social media, her husband was literally selling those same girls out. Not being political here, just being factual. Buhari has tightened his grip on the country. His Minister of Information, which is a very important position because every telephone, every bank account, every visa has biometrics. You have to do a thumbprint and all that. And this guy sits on top of all that. He has publicly called for the murder of Christians. Last time we were there, a year ago, the whole tone had changed. People were afraid. We had to sneak in under fake pretense. We were told if the government found out what we were doing, we would have been killed. We got there, the week before we got there, we were watching the developments. There was an Israeli documentary team that had been arrested there, and no one had heard from them, and finally their government got them out. The week before we got there, they got out, and as soon as their feet hit Israeli soil, they said, "We were tortured every day." And we arrived a week later to film a documentary. It's bad. It's bad. It's the #1 nation on earth for Christian genocide. I had found a UN report about the new Kuchingoro camp where we have that school. Now the UN, I have it on an email from the director. They deny that the camp exists. I said, "I got a report from you from 5 years ago. I was just there the other day. It hasn't changed since you reported on it." Well, no, there's no IDPs there. Our government, one of Biden's first acts when he took office, he officially removed Nigeria from the religious persecution watch list, where it had been #1 for a very long time, the #1 nation on earth for Christian genocide. It's no longer a concern of ours. It's not on our watch list. When we were there, a year ago, there was we had, again, I won't go all the details of the elaborate cover story and all the extent we went to hide our true purpose for being there. And we stayed as much as possible at our protected hotel and brought people to us. A pastor was smuggled to us from the north. Ends up, he was from Miss Hanitu's city. And he had spent the last several years documenting the atrocities. This was his calling. He was a pastor. He didn't have a flock. What do I do? How do I serve the Lord? Well, he was taking notes for the future. He brought us this book. If they would have discovered this, they would have killed everybody involved, him and us. It's their name of the martyr and an eyewitness and the eyewitness's phone number in case you want to question it. It just keeps going. One of the young men, one of those three, Miss Hanitu's dear assistants there that sacrificially started that school and kept it running until we stepped in. Name's Enoch. Young man, his father was a college professor and was hacked to death with machetes. Enoch escaped, made it to New Kuchingoro. He had taken a first aid class, and so he was the midwife. He delivered 50 some odd babies. Poor young man, he had a college education, but because his college was burned to the ground, he couldn't prove he had a degree. And so he had some potential jobs. Smart guy, very well educated. But until he could prove he had a degree, he couldn't get hired, but the school was burned down. So sort of a tough spot there. This is Enoch, and I'm showing him this book. I lost a few pounds since then. He's stopping me on every page. That's my cousin. That's my uncle. That's my brother. That's my good friend. Every page. I look up and everybody in the room is crying. Yes, ma'am.
So Obama did that, and then Biden did that. What did Trump do during those years?
It was greatly improved.
I'm sorry, I'm hard.
It's tough because there was a hostile president there. Muhammad Buhari wouldn't let us do a whole lot. But there was some instances where he sent special forces in to get some work done, but he had to do it without their permission. Again, once the presidency and the army and all the machinery of the government's handed off to the other side. But yeah, they love President Trump. Everywhere I've been in the world thinks he's great, but here, they very much loved him because of he stood strong and he did things. He sent special forces in. He rescued people. But again, without the government to cooperate with, there's not so much he could do. Yes, sir.
So is this guy, is he Boko Haram or is that a separate entity?
So since Muhammad Buhari took over, one thing Trump did, he bombed ISIS out of the Middle East, right? Where did they go? They didn't cease to exist. They have relocated now to Nigeria, where Buhari has given them safe harbor. All that stuff you knew about ISIS, very sophisticated, international, well-funded, extremely brutal, sophisticated organization, they have now moved into Nigeria and go by the name ISWAP, Islamic State West African Province. Nobody's paying attention. They're taking over the nation. They're taking over one of the top 5 nations in OPEC. Imagine ISIS with that much oil and a government of their own. I mean, so I wrote a little blurb about the documentary we're working on, and I had my friend, the ambassador, proofread it because I can be a little bit colorful sometimes. I wanted it to be, vetted thoroughly. And in this little thing, I said, if the world doesn't take note and step in soon, we will witness a genocide unseen since Hitler or Stalin or Mao. And Ambassador Luck said, Mike, if anything, you're understating it. We are witnessing the start of a genocide of Christians unseen in its scope since Hitler or Stalin or Mao. And the world is not paying attention. This is not just a battle, though, for these lives and these kids. That's important, of course. This is a battle for control of a bellwether nation in a fast-rising continent that is going to be a world leader. Who's going to be in charge there? That's what this is about. Yeah, I sort of feel like Alice in Wonderland. You know, the rabbit hole keeps going deeper the more I dig. But it's important work. You know, what's interesting, so Boko Haram's still a big part of it. You know, they're with ISWAP. Do you know what Boko Haram translates to in English? Western education is forbidden. What's the one thing Miss Hannatu asked for? Help educate these kids. Does that show you where the battle is fought? The best way to fight back against them is through education, because that's what they're fighting against. I believe these children are living as refugees for the same reason Jesus did when he was a child. Remember, he had to flee to Egypt? It's because the enemy knows their worth and will wipe out a generation of them if they have to keep them from achieving their full potential. So that's why we build schools in IDP camps in Nigeria, and that's why we're producing a documentary trying to stop a genocide. Yes, ma'am.
So, Rotary, what can Rotary do to help these kids?
So we have bought a plot of land next to an IDP camp that has 1,000 children in it. We can build a school there and staff it. I just need to raise the funds to do it. To build an 8-room, brand new schoolhouse, well appointed with bathrooms for 1,000 kids, it's going to cost us about $20,000.
What makes you think ISIS and Boko Haram will tear it down?
Well, if they do, we'll rebuild it. I mean, what do you do? Abuja historically is much more stable. It's in the central part, and it's also the seat of government. So there's.
Yeah, the seat of government is a bad guy.
It is. I know the president is threatening to bulldoze these camps. He's writing them off as squatters and homeless and vagrants and bums. We do what we can. There's no facility at this camp for these 1,000 kids, and nobody's doing anything. Dang it, we're going to do something. Can't let the other side win, and if they tear it down, we'll rebuild it. If they tear that down, we'll rebuild it. I mean, what else can we do?
Wouldn't it be wise to bring some of those kids here to educate them?
Good luck getting a visa. They're not persecuted, remember? There's no grounds for asylum. My family there, Pastor Jed.
Come through Mexico.
So my family, Pastor Jed DeGrace, I didn't point her out, but his wife, Uzo Amaka, we call her Mama, she's got a master's in education administration. She's the superintendent of our schools. Remarkable, remarkable people. When they left, we found out that the government, after we had left, had got word of what we were doing there, and they'd put the DeGrace family on the hit list. And we spent 8-9 months trying to even get traction for a visa. Just to apply for a visa and go for the interview, which is unlikely to succeed, it's like a 4-year waiting list. So the only alternative was to, and we, believe me, spent months and months and months trying to get them out while they've been living in hiding, is get them to South America or Central America and have them come up through the border. But I don't know that that's any safer. The ones that make it there that are blessed politically can be given a phone and education, but that's the tip of the iceberg, and a lot of them are found in the desert. A lot of them are found dead. I wouldn't put those kids through that.
$2 billion coming across anyway, so what the heck's the difference?
Mike, you want to talk?
You spend months doing it and fail.
Yeah.
Spend months doing it that way.
I'm definitely open to it. Again, it's a tough place.
I know.
Yeah.
This sounds like a Rotary International meeting needs to be.
It's a big deal. You know, I'm working on, and if anybody wants to help out with the documentary, that's a big, you know, it's going to cost a bit to do that. We've got some very high caliber people involved by God's grace, but you know, Lord willing, it's going to shine the light, and people are going to take note. We're aiming to do a high quality, you know, Cannes Film Festival class, because that's what you got to do these days to be noticed, right? And so that's what we're working on. Yeah, just the right spotlight being shined there will make a big difference, I think. Yes, ma'am.
I know that nobody spends money near as much as China on Africa building roads and infrastructure. Of course, it's to benefit them.
They rape
So
the land.
Are they all supportive of these kids with these?
No. In fact, I mean, I could go into the history of it. The southern part, where it's south and east Nigeria, primarily the Igbo tribe, IGBO, they're very bright, brilliant, honorable peoples. This area is called Biafra. We didn't hear about it as much over here because this happened at the same time as our Vietnam War. They got their independence from Great Britain in the middle of the last century. Got some traction, got going, and during this time, Biafra was the fastest growing economic region on earth for 10 years running. I mean, that's remarkable. There was a struggle between the North and the South for control of the federal government. The South had prevailed, and these were the people that were the functionaries in the British Empire. They're the ones that went to England to get educated. They're the ones that were the right hand to the governors and stuff. I mean, these were the people that supported the British Empire, friendlies, right? The Biafrans. They were in control of the government. Well, the North made this counter push to take over, and it split into a civil war, and Biafra declared independence. It was a bloody war, literally millions killed, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of children starved to death because of naval blockade. That was run by the British. The British took the side of the North. The Muslims that hated them always attacked them and always fought against them to push down those who had been their friends and supporters, the Christians. The British ran the naval blockade that starved hundreds of thousands of children. Fact, okay? The world does not want to see them rise. They want to control it, they want to extract, they want to rape and pillage, which is what they do. It's the worst form of colonialism that you can see. They just extract, they take, they bribe, and they take. And I've seen that over and over and over. And they don't benefit from these people rising up and being what they can be. I've become good friends with Lara Logan. She's former CBS News chief international correspondent, 60 Minutes correspondent. She actually lives in Fredericksburg. She's helping me with this. Her sources are impeccable. She said she's heard that British MI6 is behind ISWAP, which makes sense historically speaking. They thrive on the chaos. No one's riding to the rescue. In fact, I was there last year when Afghanistan fell to the Taliban. And talk about just a widespread anguish. That was when they, I think, finally realized as a people that America ain't going to help us. They just handed a nation off to these radical, hateful people. They don't care about us.
Mike, I think we can listen to you.
Okay, yeah, I can talk all night. I'm sorry, that was a long time. That's any more questions?
I got one.
Yes, sir.
You talk about security over there and all that, and I'm sure everybody loves the ministry that you're doing. But is there going to be a point when the government changes that y'all won't be able to do your?
We were supposed to be there. We had it all geared up to go there next month, and the State Department came out with a red flag warning for Abuja and pulled out all non-essential personnel, pulled out the embassy families and said, do not go. I've ignored warnings like that before, but Great Britain came along and did the same thing, and we decided to delay our trip. We're going in January instead, but you know. In fact, we have to figure out ways to get our video footage out in case we don't. I mean, it's dicey. Yeah.
Basically, y'all pull it out? You have to.
No. Our organization is mostly native. I mean, it's those. I mean, we can send money there, and we don't have American white teachers there in these camps. They're natives, and you can't stop that. You can't stop that. You know, they're going to keep doing what they're doing until they're killed. Yes,
Wow.
sorry. Thank you.
That is amazing. Thank you very much.
I'll pass this around. This is the most valuable thing I've ever held because the price paid for it. If you want to pass that around, just be careful with it, please. Do what? Yeah, if you look at the little flyers, I've got some more if you need them. Information on how you can get, there's some videos there and information on how you can help out. And I'll be around. You know where I am. Thank you. Harvey, thank you.
Oh, thank you. You know, Mike, I'm thinking that you probably need to look at flood runner, get somebody that can put you with the clubs that are pretty wealthy. There's plenty of them around.
I'll go anywhere, anytime.
Some of these guys, like if they have a fundraiser, they'll raise $200,000-300,000.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, we're just not that wealthy club, and we have just.
Yeah, just maybe a suggestion right here. Wonder if it might be possible if we can do an article on Mike that's submitted to the district newsletter, and just maybe get a little grassroots thing started within our own district with connections and things like that here to bring some awareness to the Rotarians, because a lot of Rotarians want to help. Maybe if we don't do it as Rotary Club, but a lot of Rotarians are really nice benefactors, and they have the sense of wanting to help other people. But if we can get maybe a good article in the district newsletter, along with the connections and links and stuff like that, where, like I said, if we don't do things as a Rotary organization, because it does sound like there's some great opportunities for international projects right here, but I know we're going to run across some red tape in it. But for individual contributors to maybe do something right there, you go from 25 to 50 to 100 to maybe a couple thousand, and whatever we can do on an individual basis.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Mike. Impressively interesting. Politics, trying to keep politics out of anything, huh?
Yeah.
Impossible. Okay, everybody got a flyer here.